I thought my dad was just a boring khakis guy until my boyfriend sneered. My mom pulled a sticker-covered guitar out of the closet, and my dad fingered the strings like a legend just waking up. That night, before I could even feel proud, the online war started a stolen journal. Spliced stories, our family's honor turned into content. This is the story of how I learned to put the phone down, hold onto a single rest, and choose ordinary over winning and losing. Listen through to find out why one USB could save an entire bridge. Chapter 1: The Fateful Dinner. My dad is the definition of boring, sand-colored khakis and old polo, a 1995 haircut frozen in time driving a beige minivan saturated with the smell of cold coffee. If stability had a scent, it would be hot leather seats under the noon sun, plus the sigh of NPR on the radio. My boyfriend Kyle is the opposite. Football team captain. Plays guitar in a garage band. When he walks down a hallway, the air parts. When he asked to come over for dinner last month, I wanted to say no. I looked at the row of lawn gnomes my mom displays out front and saw Kyle's eyes tilt with a little smirk. Cute. Meaning, your parents are probably predictable. Dinner didn't start badly. Mom brought out her famous pot roast. Dad made small talk about school and next week's game. I was just starting to breathe when Kyle spotted the old piano in the living room corner. "Do you guys play?" he asked, but the smile on his lips already had an answer. "Not much," my dad said, still cutting the beef into perfect little squares like he always does. Kyle grinned. I know that grin, the exact one he wears before he levels someone on the field. Figured. You don't really look like the arts type, no judgment. I kicked him under the table. He kept going. Some people are born to burn on stage and some just do taxes. He flicked his hand toward Dad's polo. Mom shot me a look strong enough to make me swallow the comeback. Her hand landed on mine, light but firm, stay put. Kyle stood. "Perfect, my guitar's in the car. Let me show you what real music is." Before I could stop him, he lugged the case and amp into the dining room and plugged in next to the plates. He ripped into Thunderstruck. What came out of the speaker was strings being tortured. Then he switched to something meant to be Sweet Child of Mine, which sounded like a cat locked in with a blender. "Pretty good, right? I bet you don't hear much of this out in the suburbs." He crowed, cranking the amp louder. Then he carried the guitar right up to my dad. "Come on, P-Dog, give it a go." "Riptide works too." That's when my dad finally looked up. His eyes were different, focused like someone had flipped a different switch inside him. "Are you finished?" he asked quietly. Kyle gave a thin laugh. Oh, touched a nerve. That's real life. Some people are born great, and some... He swept his eyes up and down my dad do data entry. Mom stood and went straight to the hall closet. I heard things shifting. She came back with an old scuffed guitar case plastered in peeling stickers. Dad looked at Mom and murmured, "Sarah..." "Play," Mom said, popping the latches. Inside lay a jet black guitar, nicked in places like it had been through a war. She handed it to Dad the way you hand back a weapon that already knows the shape of the hand holding it. Dad plugged straight into Kyle's amp and twisted a few knobs without looking. His shoulders snapped straight. His fingers slid up the neck like they were home. The sound hit you in the chest. Not loud, thick, clean, sharp as glass. The classic rock runs I'd only ever heard on the radio materialized right there in our dining room. His fingers blurred before my eyes. Kyle stood frozen, still gripping his own guitar strap, like he'd accidentally grabbed the wrong leash. Dad played for about 2 minutes. While he played, he spoke in an even tone like reading off a bank statement. "Your college fund didn't come from accounting. 3 platinum albums back in the 90s. Toured with a few legends. I dropped it all the day you were born. Being your father mattered more than being famous." Kyle practically ran out of the house. I sat there stunned, staring at the man in a polo and khakis who'd just shredded the boring shell in front of me. Mom squeezed my shoulder. Now you know. Dad unplugged, set the guitar back in the case like placing a baby in a crib. Out on the porch under the light, I could read the stickers backstage passes venue names I'd only ever seen in documentaries. His hands trembled slightly. That night, I went upstairs with my head still ringing. My phone buzzed. A text from Kyle, 3 words enough to make my stomach drop to the floor. I pulled the curtain and looked down. Dad stood in the garage doorway for a long time before going in. The next morning, he was back at the table with a newspaper khakis polo, a glass of orange juice. The case had vanished like it had never existed. If the story ended there, I'd probably memorize the lesson about Dad isn't boring, Dad's an anonymous legend, and thank the universe. But that was just the opening move. A few hours later, Kyle started turning my family into his content, and I had no idea I was about to fall into a war where every like and every share would be a stone thrown through our windows. Chapter 2. 3 words and a storm. Kyle's text had only 3 words, wait and see. I didn't reply. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling as if there were a rewind button up there. In the morning, Dad was still in a polo and khakis, the paper open to the business section. The guitar case had vanished as if it had never existed. Mom poured orange juice. No one mentioned last night. Normal snapped back fast as if our family had signed a contract with it. In the school parking lot, I saw Kyle's car, but not him. I opened my phone and understood why. He'd posted a photo of Dad's minivan zoomed in tight on the license plate, with a smug caption like Platinum Legacy Heirloom Beige. The views ticked up before my eyes. The comments turned rancid instantly. I went looking for Kyle and found him at the lockers, ringed by the football team. When he saw me, he raised his voice just enough for the whole hallway to hear, "Hello, Princess of Suburbia. Your dad's music is so elite, huh?" People turned to watch me like they were watching a trailer. I heard someone mention my grandfather's funeral 2 years ago with a laugh. "Yeah, that girl is always overdramatic." My face burned. Before I could think, I shoved Kyle into the locker. Metal clanged and the hallway went dead quiet. Kyle straightened his team jacket, smirked like he'd put points on the board. "Careful there, Emma." The bell rang. The crowd scattered, leaving the two of us facing each other in the thin air of stories about to be retold in a way that benefits one side. Second break. Jess yanked me into the bathroom. I was splashing cold water on my face when she said voice, like swallowing ice. She needed a letter from Kyle's dad for her scholarship file. He's a coach with connections to her dream school. She wasn't taking Kyle's side, but she needed her future. I heard the word need, and my throat went bitter. I said I understood, even as it felt like another door latch inside me coming loose. While I sat in the library, polishing Jess's essay, Kyle was busy screenshotting our old texts. Things I'd once vented about my parents on a bad day were curated, lopped off at the beginning and end, and thrown online like bait. By lunch, the whole school had read Emma's version, as edited by Kyle. 6th period was the combo hit. Kyle's story about Dad got reshared by half the school. An email from a college interviewer claiming to be Kyle's aunt said she was looking forward to meeting me next week. And a text from Mom, the ladies in the book club are asking about your video, with a period that felt endless. I felt like I was being pushed under a pool each time I came up for air another wave hit. After school, I stopped by Dad's office to drop off the lunch Mom had forgotten. I reached out and snapped a selfie with Dad, a rookie mistake location services on. A few minutes later came the comments. "Hey, I know this building." "What floor does he work on?" I deleted it immediately. Useless. Everything online is ink, spilled into water. It spreads. The next day, out of exhaustion, I made another mistake. Someone asked why we broke up, and I blurted out a jab at Kyle's dad's drinking. Kyle was 3 tables away. His face went pale. He gasped, clutching his chest. The cafeteria stopped eating and talking. Teachers ran over. Phones went up. Within minutes, the story changed color. Poor Kyle, cruel me. If there's a title called villain, it had just been glued to my forehead, industrial strength adhesive. That evening, my little brother chattered about how Kyle had been teaching him to run tryout drills. Why are you being mean to him? I looked over at my parents. Their eyes met in the air, a look I couldn't decode. Worry, anger, helplessness, all wrapped in our family's polite silence. The next day, Kyle accidentally left his backpack in my car after practice. In the clear front pocket was the diary I thought I'd lost weeks ago. A page with writing about Dad peeked out like a trap wrapped in plastic. I could have snatched it, but that would be stealing. I took a photo from a distance, my hands shaking with anger, while I moved as carefully as if walking on thin ice. The following morning, I got to school early to stake out Kyle's locker code and grab proof. Before I could punch anything in, the school counselor caught me crouched there, phone in hand. She invited me into her office, noted concerning behavior, and asked if I wanted to talk. I nodded just to be done. Each check mark felt like another brick in the Emma is unstable file. That afternoon, Kyle's mother called our house about divorce. Tax documents, turns out Dad is handling her file. Dad spoke professionally, but I could hear the tension in his vocal cords. When he hung up, my mother stayed quiet longer than usual before going back to the kitchen. My aunt called the next day. She thought she was being kind when she reminded me, remember at your grandfather's funeral, you also thought someone was out to get you. A kind sentence can sting like a slap. I had once lost my way from grief. Now, was I losing it from pride? In the class group chat, Kyle perfected the art of worrying on my behalf. He dropped a sad face under the post where I pushed back with hope. She's okay. 3 teachers in a row pulled me into the hall over reported online bullying. I kept dozing off in class, leaving ink smears across my notebook, like the path of a capsized little boat. Kyle still wasn't done. He opened the family Spotify, pulled up Dad's old tracks at a friend's party, then commented, found these on streaming, any fans of old bands. The laughter spread like drizzle. I started learning the art of breathing through the night. Jess texted officially to bow out. Her boyfriend had threatened to break up because you keep dragging Kyle into things and she didn't want to lose anything else. We hugged in the parking lot. She cried apologies. I said I was fine. A lie sounds light as cotton, but it weighs like stone. A parent sent my mom a Facebook thread from the moms group that unstable Peelser girl is sabotaging the school's star. Mom held the phone, her face drained of color. The women who used to stand with her behind the bake sale table were now tallying my family's sins with exclamation points. That night, I retraced every footprint looking for a place to turn around. There wasn't one. Every direction was mud. Kyle had pitched camp on the border between truth and story, and I, in trying to drag him out, had slipped after him. The next morning, I decided to keep silent all day. No reaction, no post, not a single text, but silence online is like leaving the field and letting the opponent run up the score. Kyle posted another story, a photo of my dad's old band tee worn to swim practice by his new girlfriend. The caption was a tweaked lyric tagging me with a mocking look. I meant to tell Dad I was sorry for being ashamed of him that night, but he was bent over adjusting his schedule, a pen tucked behind his ear like every morning. I swallowed it. Apologies need their own air, not the smell of a coming storm. By day's end, I got the email reminding me of my college interview. Kyle's aunt would be the one sitting across from me. At the same moment, Mom texted a friend from book club, wants to know why you shoved Kyle at the lockers. I looked at the screen, then at my hands. The hands that shoved. The hands that sent lousy texts. The hands that took a geotagged selfie. For a moment, I saw myself standing on the middle span of a bridge, messy truth on one side, a neat, easy-to-swallow story on the other. I stood on the story side. I stood in the middle headwind in my face, hands empty. And the storm was only beginning. Chapter 3. The Journal, the Mirror, and the Neat. Story I thought the storm would get tired and stop. It didn't. It learned to use my name to catch more wind. That morning, the school counselor invited me into her office with a slip that said, concerning behavior. Reason I'd been caught crouching by the locker's phone in hand like a trainee thief. I didn't say I'd been trying to snap Kyle's locker code because I'd seen my journal peeking from the clear pocket of his backpack, the page folded exactly where I'd once written about Dad. I just sat and listened to her pen hitting paper, each stroke, like another brick added to the wall of Emma is unstable. In the afternoon, Kyle's mother called our house. Dad picked up voice professional like a ruler laid along a table's edge. Yes, your 3 years of tax documents for the divorce, I'll send them. When he hung up, the kitchen went quiet and a different kind of quiet. On my father's face, I saw subtractions no textbook teaches. That night, a post appeared. Kyle said I'd left my journal at his house during a study session. He named the exact day we actually did study together. Half-truths are the kind of sugar people eat without noticing the cavities. Our class group chat blew up. Everyone already had a neat version in their heads, the girl who lies to heighten the drama, the poor boy looked down on by boring parents. The next morning, the college counselor called me in. In a very sympathetic voice, she said Kyle's aunt would be my interviewer next week, and Kyle's father is a fairly influential alumnus. She didn't need to finish the sentence for me to understand. By noon, I thought I'd caught a lie. Kyle bragged practice went late on Tuesday, but the team schedule said otherwise. Problem was to verify it, I'd skipped SAT prep and had a friend in the athletics office check for me. Just as I exhaled and smiled to myself, the yearbook photographer clicked the shutter. In the frame, I looked like I was celebrating someone else's pain. The picture made a full lap online before I could explain I'd only been celebrating being less wrong than usual. That evening, Kyle posted his college essay on the school's showcase. In it, I was the manipulative girlfriend, hiding family truths behind layers of masks. Worst of all were the things I'd once texted on a bad day about Dad. Pathetic he's so boring, yanked out of context and set into the frame of evidence. Dinner at home was so quiet you could hear the spoon touch the plate. My little brother asked why you made Dad quit music like Kyle had said at football practice. Mom set her fork down very slowly. Dad didn't look up, but his jaw clenched. A child's question hit the table like a stone cracking glass. The next day, neighbors whispered they'd seen someone's ring that captured the hallway the day I shoved Kyle. In the video, I was the one to strike first, and Kyle just stood there. I couldn't erase that frozen frame from the principal's head during the meeting about behavior affecting the performance of an elite student athlete. As if to seal the box, Kyle dropped a TikTok splicing together my father playing guitar. The comments poured in, lip sync, deepfake staged. The truest thing in our house was turned into a prop for a play he wrote. I dug through our old Google Drive folder, nosed into Kyle's essay drafts, found versions that rearranged words to please the crowd. But to get in, I used our old shared access, and the activity log tipped Kyle off. The next day, he posted about a stalker. I tried to record him threatening me by the trophy case. The glass reflected the screen, glowing in my pocket. He spread his hands, feigning surprise as he asked why I was secretly recording, and the whole hallway heard. 3 sleepless nights dragged me down like a soaked raincoat. I nodded off in chemistry history, English. The nurse pulled me in, circled around home environment, and the scratches on my arm, the cats suddenly labeled concerning signs. Every conversation was another sheet added to a file I didn't control. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, the pickup schedule turned into torture. Kyle pulled up at the curb. My brother hopped into the passenger seat, laughing louder than on any evening he talked to me. I stood at the kitchen window, fingers biting the sill. Mom pretended to rummage in a cabinet so she wouldn't have to watch the car's silhouette disappear. I planned to ask the music teacher to confirm Dad actually played. The next day, the teacher vanished from email an anonymous complaint about excessive interest in student relationships. A potential ally had his plug pulled. Kyle switched tactics. He posted a photo of Dad's tour tee worn by his new girlfriend, captioned "Missing the Peelser family" and those cozy dinners. Comments poured in. He tried so hard to fit in Emma's awful. A mutual friend relayed an offer. If you apologize publicly for leading him on, he'll delete everything. The condition admit I'd embellished my family story to impress. I said, no. 5 minutes later, another story. Pride kills kindness. One evening, I realized the practice schedule I'd been following had changed. A while ago. Every timestamp I'd used to reconstruct the journal incident suddenly went fuzzy. My certainty popped free like a button with its thread snapped. I wasn't just losing to Kyle. I was starting to lose to myself. I went up to the attic and dug through old moving boxes. At the bottom of a brown carton, I found Dad's recording contract, thick pages numbers bigger than my teenage dreams. In the margin, a looping line in faded blue ink, Emma born today. Easiest decision. I laid my hand over it and caught the smell of old paper mixed with attic dust and a faint coffee scent, the same one in the minivan. Dad didn't run. Dad turned around the day I arrived. I brought the papers downstairs. Mom sat beside me and opened another file. Dad's letter to the label requesting to end the tour because he was missing first with his child. Court documents from his old band's lawsuit. Receipts showing $47,000 pulled from retirement funds. 3 emails declining reunion tours because they conflicted with my science fair, my ballet recital, my middle school graduation. I read Emma is forever on one sheet and felt my eyes burn. The good news is the truth exists. The bad news is that the neat story always wins where it's loud. Kyle turned these papers into proof of selfishness. My dad abandoned his bandmates, wrecked the collective dream for suburbia. Everything I brought out was like a spade in the weeds, turn the soil, and they grow back, with a caption. That night, Grandma called. She didn't talk about Kyle. She talked about Dad's khakis, about the sweat at the nape of his neck when he carried me home from the hospital, about the silver pick he's worn around his neck since he stopped touring. She said, "A boring life is the most luxurious gift people give each other." I held the phone and cried without sound. Not because of Kyle, because I'd been so busy proving who was right and wrong, I forgot that Dad chooses right every day. The next morning, I decided to do it the right way to the end. I confessed to the counselor that I'd tracked Kyle's schedule, tried to record him, read the old drive if she'd trade me for real advice. She sighed. Added more notes to the file, then said a simple line. You two are locking each other inside each other's mirror. I walked out past the trophy case and stopped where my reflection had betrayed me. I saw myself, greasy hair, dark circles, trembling hands. Down the hall, Kyle and his friends were laughing. Strange thing, just for a second I didn't hate him. I saw a kid like me trying to be the most lovable version of himself in a world that likes stories that are easy to understand. I wish that were enough to fix everything. It isn't. But it cracked a door open. And behind that crack, for the first time, I thought about quitting the game, not because I was losing, but because if we kept playing, whoever won would still come out a loser. That day when I opened my locker for a book, I found an empty USB drive in my coat pocket. I didn't remember putting it there. But suddenly, I knew what I was going to do with it. Not to post, to end it. Chapter 4. The USB and the choice to end it. The little USB drive sat in my coat pocket like a stone. Not heavy, but every time I touched it, I heard water ripple in my head. That night, I turned the kitchen table into an evidence room laptop notebook, a mess of screenshots, the papers Dad had brought down from the attic. I gathered even the things that hurt me. The ring photo of me shoving Kyle the text, where I called Dad pathetic on a bad day. If I wanted to end this, I had to look at the story exactly as ugly as it was. I made a simple timeline starting with the dinner and the guitar, then the minivan post, the hallway, the showcase, Essay the time. I staked out his locker code, the 3 sleepless nights, the document saying Dad paid 47 grand to leave the tour. I dragged each file onto the USB and named the folder without poetry what happened. At the end, I made one more empty folder what won't be posted. The next morning was the pep rally. I planned to skip, but attendance was mandatory. The whole school was packed into the gym, music blaring, a sea of people waving signs. Kyle stood by the stage talking with some friends right next to a live mic. I sat in the top row, thinking about how to get out of there without making eye contact with anyone. Then the line boomed across the speakers. So yeah, I juiced a few details to make it a story. Big deal. Not a proclamation, just bragging to his friends, but the mic was hot. The entire gym heard it. A few phones went up by reflex. I looked up and saw Koa, the sound tech, frantically twisting knobs too late. One tilting second. The crowd murmured like wind crossing a field of dry grass. The pep rally clip hit my phone 10 minutes later. I opened it. I didn't upload it anywhere. I dragged it straight onto the USB at the bottom, right above the what won't be posted folder. My hands shook a little, not from triumph, but from knowing I was holding something that could burn every bridge left. I don't want to live in a city without bridges. That afternoon, I prepped envelopes. One envelope for myself, the recording contract, the Emma born today, note a few confirmations of declined reunion tours. I sat in the driver's seat, started the car, and headed to Kyle's neighborhood while there was still morning mist. His mom's car was in the driveway, a light on, in the kitchen window. I slid the envelope under the door, rang the bell, and went back to my car. No need for a conversation. Just let the evidence go ahead of my ego. That night, Dad was in the garage, the door cracked to let in autumn wood smoke. He sat with the old guitar unplugged, picking lightly like talking to an old friend. I leaned against the doorframe and asked if I could end this in one stroke, should I? Dad was quiet for a while. You think it's a game, he said, but the two of you are playing football in your own living room. Even if you score, the furniture breaks. But he deserves it, I blurted. I felt how hollow that was the instant it came out. Dad looked up. Maybe. Or maybe he's just a hurt kid acting out a role he thinks will save him. He set the guitar down. Back then, I didn't leave the band to beat anyone. I left to stay with the thing that didn't need winning. I watched the silver pick on his neck flash under the warm bulb, something so small, yet it kept a person from the loud temptations. I nodded. Not because I forgave Kyle, because I decided to spare myself another courtroom on the internet. The next day, the school sent a mediation notice. Admin wanted it wrapped up before it blew bigger. 2 families, a counselor, lawyers, if any. I slipped the letter into my bag with the USB. Before I zipped it, I wrote on a small piece of paper, I could destroy you. I'm choosing not to. Stop here. Take everything down within 24 hours. Leave my little brother alone. That weekend, I got a message from a strange account. Your dad turned down 3 reunion tours because of you. Give it up, Emma. Your dad's a hero. Attached were shots of the contracts. The sender was the band's former drummer. He'd seen Kyle's post and dug up my email through a friend. I didn't reply. I just printed what he sent and stapled it into the what happened stack. Turns out sometimes if you don't strike the match, the world still brings dry kindling at the right time. On Sunday, I found Mom in the kitchen too clean. A sign she'd been scrubbing to bleed off stress. She spoke softly like a passing shower. You don't need to win this. You just need not to let it define you. I hugged her. The smell of laundry detergent and orange dish soap made me feel 12 again, when the most complicated thing was how not to get scolded for not wiping the table. At night, I opened my laptop one last time. I added a single text file to the USB My Rules. First line. Don't pose for catharsis. Don't humiliate anyone in public. Don't use my little brother as leverage. Last line. If possible, choose deliberate silence. If not, choose truth that doesn't humiliate. Monday morning, a fine drizzle. I wore a hooded coat, slipped the USB into an envelope, and wrote Kyle's name on the outside letters steady like writing a test. Before leaving the house, I stopped by the garage. Dad was strapping down the toolbox. I said, I'm going to take it over. I don't know how the ending will look, but I don't want more blood on my hands. Dad nodded, no lecture. He just said, whenever you want. We can sit in the minivan and play an old song again. I smiled. A small promise was enough to pull me across the threshold. The school's mediation room was smaller than I'd imagined. A round table fabric chairs, a cheap landscape hung crooked. Kyle sat across from me, dark circles under his eyes, that familiar knee bounce under the table. His mother sat rigid. His father looked at his phone. My parents flanked me, silent but warm. I set the envelope with the USB in front of Kyle. No speech. No reveal. Just nudged it like pushing a pebble back to its square on the board. His eyes flashed with things I'd seen in my own fear, curiosity, the instinct to guard. I have enough to end you, I said slowly, but I'm tired. Take it all down and leave my little brother alone. There was a beat. Then I saw his shoulders drop. Not surrender. The look of someone realizing he'd gone too far. He nodded very slightly. I didn't believe it immediately. But for the first time, I saw the possibility that we could walk out of this room without another round. When the mediator started talking about a no-contact order and a transfer, I looked at Dad's silver pick reflected on the wooden tabletop. Small and bright, lying still not needing applause to know it exists. I told myself, if there's any way to get through 17 without tearing, it's probably this putting down what could set someone else on fire and choosing to walk past. Outside the window, the rain was so thin it looked like a veil of dust. I took a long breath. I didn't win. Neither did Kyle. But maybe for the first time in months, no one lost anymore. Chapter 5. The Lines on Paper. The mediator was a retired judge, his voice as deep as the wooden table in front of us. He flipped through stacks of complaints, thick as an almanac, post texts, counseling notes, ring footage, parent emails. On paper, we both looked bad. In life, not much better. Kyle opened the envelope I'd slid across. He saw the USB and the little handwritten note. When he finished reading, he looked up at me with eyes a shade less sharp. No, sorry, no thank you, just the look of someone who'd realized how close to the edge he'd been standing. The reporting began by the book. The counselor read her notes. I'd staked out his locker code, tried to record him, accessed an old shared drive. Kyle cut and spliced, labeled, built a worried on her behalf narrative. The vice principal covered lunch periods, impact on rankings, the discipline grid. The judge drew lines with his pen, each stroke a new boundary. Recommendations, he said, setting the pen down, two-way no contact order. No messages, no tags, no using others as proxies. Minimum distance on campus, mandatory counseling, a change of environment, each of you to a different place so you can breathe. He looked at each family in turn, and one clause with few words, but the hardest of all, no money, no clout from this story. No clickbait articles, no views-chasing clips, no making the rounds to collect sympathy. The school's attorney slid over a sheaf of papers. I signed. My parents signed. Kyle and his parents signed. Each signature felt like pulling a nail out of a wall we ourselves had hammered. Midway through, Jess and her parents slipped in. My digging for an alibi had pricked her mom's workplace. They had to sit for the relevant section. Jess's mother's eyes were red. When the judge moved to propagated harms, I turned to look. Jess kept her head down. We didn't hug. Some hugs need more time than a meeting can give. Then it was my dad's turn. He didn't talk about stages or albums. He said exactly three things. That he had been famous, that he left when I was born, and that it's a choice he has never regretted. He didn't look at Kyle. He looked straight past the adults in the room, as if to remind us sometimes adults choose boring so kids have room to grow. Kyle's mother cried. Kyle's father, the coach, shifted in his chair and set his phone down. The judge looked over. Regarding Emma's little brother's playing time, he said, "I hope we stop using children as leverage." The coach nodded short and dry, but I heard it. The last part was logistics. Kyle would move to the district's alternative program. I would transfer to the art school across the city. Discipline files would be sealed so they wouldn't affect college applications. We'd both start counseling on a fixed schedule. All old posts had to come down within 24 hours. Any accounts used for indirect attacks had to be closed. The graduation seating chart would look like an evacuation map, no one proud of it, but no one running. When the mediator asked if anyone had more to say, I turned to Kyle. "Don't touch my little brother again." He nodded. No vows, no social media style commitments. Just a nod. I force myself to believe in small things like that because the big ones have mostly been used to hit each other. Outside the room, misting rain covered the schoolyard. Dad pulled my hood up, a move as familiar as plugging in the charger every night. In the car, no one turned on the radio. Mom held the stack of papers under her arm like a perfectly ordinary set of lab results, bad, but with a name. That afternoon, I cleaned my room. I put the USB in the safe with Dad's papers, the contract, the letter, the payoff receipts. I didn't lock the safe for fear of thieves. I locked it because I feared myself on some weeknight. At my desk, I wrote a list for the new school bus pass sketchbook, headphones, and empty hard drive. Toward evening, my brother carried the old guitar into my room. "Teach me basic chords." I looked at him and saw the same light that used to spark when he talked football. I gave him Dad's silver pick and clipped it to the guitar strap for now. He smiled, the kind of smile our house had been missing for weeks. That night, Dad sat in the garage unplugged, picking slow chord circles. Mom washed dishes and hummed along. The guitar sounded like a sewing needle stitching up a bit of torn fabric. I stood in the doorway and thought about boring and safe. Turns out some things have to be chosen over and over, not once and for all. The art school's email came late: enrollment dates, orientation class list. I replied, confirmed, with an ordinary thank you. I shut the laptop and looked at the dark ceiling. No rewind button anymore. No roar of the storm outside either. Just steady rain like a clock, marking a new thought: you don't need to win. You just need to stop losing more. The next morning, Dad drove the minivan to my new school's intake office. Faint coffee car carpet rain, not yet dry layers of smells. Nothing special. Dad put on an old song, not a famous one. The guitar came in softly like someone opening a window. He didn't say "you did the right thing." He just tapped the steering wheel in time. I tapped along. Halfway there, he turned the music off. "You can hate him now," and then he said, "but don't let him teach you how to live." I didn't promise. I just said, "I'm relearning." In the lot, I saw a cluster of kids with guitars, someone drawing in chalk on the concrete, a girl reading a poem to the wind. I breathed in. Here nobody knew what the platinum minivan meme was. Here I was, just the girl with a notebook and a sharpened pencil. On the way back, my phone buzzed, a takedown confirmation email from Kyle's side, screenshots attached. Not everything, but enough to quiet the feed. I texted back, one word: received. No smiley, no exclamation mark. We were no longer each other's story. That night, I put the silver pick back around Dad's neck. He looked surprised. "I thought you gave that to your brother." I smiled. "That one's yours. He can use plastic." Dad chuckled, a thin breath of a laugh. We sat on the garage floor and practiced a simple song. I learned to keep an even tempo, no faster from impatience, no slower from fear. Tomorrow, I'll print my new schedule, trace the bus route, take the ID photo. Small, repetitive, ordinary things. I used to hate them. Now they look like white fencing along a safe road. Not dazzling, but they get you there. Maybe someday I'll tell this story to someone else, exactly as it was: two kids turning intimacy into a weapon, then learning to put it down. For now, I just want a peaceful sleep. No hot mics, no captions, no one worrying on my behalf. Just me, the old blanket, and the sound of rain on the roof steady and dull as khakis, and that, it turns out, is exactly what I need. Chapter 6: Roads That Don't Need Signposts. The new school had no pep rally, no gleaming trophy cases, and no one knew what the platinum minivan meme was. On the first day, I stood under the old flame tree, arms around a sketchbook and a box of pencils, feeling like I'd just swapped the SIM card of my life. Dad pulled the minivan up to the curb and opened the passenger door. He didn't ask. "You okay?" He just handed me a sandwich wrapped in brown paper and said, "I'll come back this afternoon with the old playlist." A sentence so ordinary, it felt gentle. In composition class, the teacher started with a strange exercise. Write a piece about something you didn't post. I looked at the blank page, thought about the USB sitting in the safe, thought about the pep rally clip, thought about all the answers I hadn't said out loud. I wrote one line: "I've learned to choose deliberate silence." In the afternoon, on the way home, Dad put on a song no one knows. The guitar was so soft it sounded like someone politely knocking on a door. I leaned my head against the window and for the first time in weeks fell asleep in the middle of a song. A message from the admissions office came that evening. Due to a conflict of interest, your interviewer will be replaced by another alumnus. I reread it a few times to make sure the word "ant" wasn't in there anymore. My old school sent a confirmation that the discipline record had been sealed. The loud stories were pressed down into codes in a database strangers would never read. The community, however, wasn't so quiet. Page 5 of the yearbook was a mess because of the dedication section. Half wanted to write "to the resilient captain," the other half "to the brave girl." The editors couldn't decide, so they split the page in two, leaving white space in the middle like a border. The neighborhood Facebook group kept debating, "Don't turn children into battlegrounds for adults." Was Dad leaving the band selfish or a sacrifice? At the supermarket, Mom had to hear book club friends circle around their questions. She just smiled, paid for milk, and wheeled the cart out. I watched her learn to move through a crowd, the way you walk through rain. Don't stop, don't run. My brother quit football after the team changed practice times again. He said, "It's not fun anymore." In the evenings, Dad set up a folding chair in the garage, handed him the guitar, and showed him a few basic chords. I sat on the steps and watched the two men in my house learn to talk with their fingers. Sometimes Dad took the silver pick off his neck and clipped it to the guitar strap for him. The kid smiled, and that smile made the cramped garage feel a little bigger. I started therapy on a schedule. The therapist didn't teach me to topple the narrative or reclaim the public image. She asked short questions. When you want to post, what are you protecting? When you stay silent, is there anything you're abandoning? We drew a simple chart. Fuel. Fire. In the fuel box, I wrote tired pride, fear of losing. In fire posting, splicing, clapping back. She said, putting out the fire yourself is hard, but reducing the fuel, you can do that. I took the chart home and taped it next to the mirror. One night, Jess texted Mom's, "Okay, I'm sorry for disappearing." That was all. I replied, "I'm sorry for dragging your mom in. When you're free, I've got a piece that needs a listener." No sparkly hearts, no drawn-out ellipses. A small bridge built from two sentences with no adjectives. News about Kyle reached our house indirectly. A mutual friend said he'd moved to the alternative program, less football, more assignments, no more posting. I didn't dig further. I just pinned one small truth: one person being quieter makes one part of the world less tired. Sometimes I saw adults having to relearn too. The coach Kyle's dad came to the old school to file paperwork on conflict of interest rules. He walked quietly past my dad in the parking lot. The two men didn't shake hands. They just nodded a nod, with no rancor in it, holding a short sentence enough. At the new school, I wrote a small piece for recording techniques. No lyrics, just a motif that returned after each section like footsteps returning home. The teacher asked, "What's the title?" I said, "Khakis." The whole class laughed. I laughed too. It was the first time I called boring by a friendly name. One afternoon, I saw Dad standing on the porch with a large envelope. I clipped up my hair and opened the door. Inside were old documents from the label 3 reunion invites, 3 refusals. There was also a sheet from his former manager with a scrawled line, "That day, you saved one person, yourself." I looked at Dad. He shrugged. Sometimes the past sends letters. I didn't ask why the manager had found us now. I just filed the papers with the what happened stack. Turns out the truly important things don't need registered mail. They find their own way. One weekend, Grandma invited the whole family to dinner. She set down a soup pot bigger than usual and spoke like laying out peace terms. "From now on in this house, everyone has the right to be sad, but no one has the right to post someone else's sadness." I nodded. My brother nodded. My parents nodded. A tiny treaty, but it looked sturdier to me than any promise on the internet. The college essay deadline crept closer. I sat in front of the screen, the cursor blinking like a runner's pulse. I didn't write about Kyle. I didn't write about 3 platinum albums either. I wrote about the day Dad stopped at a red light, turned off the radio to hear the rain, and said, "You can hate him now and then, but don't let him teach you how to live." I said I'd let other people write for me for a long time, and how I took the pen back, not to draw a revenge picture, but to rule a long enough line for me to walk. On Monday morning, Dad pulled the minivan up to the yellow curb again. He handed me a tumbler and said, "When your hands shake, take a sip." I hugged the cup and went to harmony class. The teacher played student tracks over the speakers, each one passing by like a polite little story. When mine came on, the khakis, melody drifted in and returned, then faded, then came back again. A classmate whispered, "Sounds like someone opens a door, then remembers to close it." I smiled. "Yeah, our house has been practicing that lately. On school festival day, I passed the basketball court where another team was performing. On a bench in the distance sat a boy with a baseball cap pulled low. Our eyes met by accident. I wasn't sure if it was Kyle, and I didn't stop to check. I just gave the smallest nod, the kind you give a stranger you used to know. Then I kept going. At the end of the month, the school sent an email about graduation, seeding a map like an evacuation plan, arrows showing paths that don't cross. I sent a picture to Dad with a smiley. He replied, "As long as we can still find each other in the parking lot." One joke that made every arrow feel less tight. Some nights, I still woke up halfway through, my heart beating from old habit, afraid of being talked about, afraid of losing the right to tell my version. I sat up, turned on the warm lamp, and looked at the fuel fire paper taped to the mirror. I crossed off one box, pride. Lights off. Lay down. Slept again. By now, my story is much less exciting than what social media likes. No explosive twist, no one canceled into oblivion. Only small things, class schedules, therapy sessions, the old playlist, the smell of coffee in the car, the sound of the guitar in the garage, and the USB resting quietly in the safe. But I think it's precisely because they're small that they hold you together. Drama gathers people very fast and scatters them just as fast. The small things stay, like lane lines on a road, like signposts that don't glow but are always there. The day Dad picked me up late, the sky burst into rain. He flipped on the wipers, his fingers tapping the wheel in rhythm. I cracked the window so the smell of rain could pour in. I don't need to tell anyone about my father's choice anymore. I'm living in it, a beige car, a man who chooses boring every day, a girl relearning silence, and a family trying to walk straight along a road that needs no signs. Chapter 7. Rests longer than applause. Week 3 of therapy. The doctor asked me an easy but hard question. If you had to choose between being right and being at peace, what would you choose today? I was quiet for a moment and said, "Peace." She nodded and made a small tick on her paper the way you mark the end of a beat. Good news came scattered like drizzle. The old school confirmed the entire discipline record had been sealed. The admissions office emailed to change my interviewer no more Aunt of Kyle's. The neighborhood Facebook group still argued over whether Dad leaving the band for family was sacrifice or selfishness. Mom learned a new skill at the supermarket. When people asked about it, she smiled, said, "I hope the kids settle soon," paid and left before the next question arrived. Jess texted after midnight. "Mom's okay. Sorry for disappearing." I stared at the screen for a long time and replied, "I'm sorry for dragging your mom in. Need background music for your scholarship essay." She typed 3 dots, then yes. The next evening, Dad and I sat in the garage and recorded a short acoustic piece, a simple melody, buoyant enough to hold Jess's voice. No title, no credit. We emailed the file neat, as setting a glass of water on someone's windowsill and walking away. A week later, Jess said she'd made it through round 1 of the scholarship. I texted happy for you. She sent back a small heart. The rest of the silence understood itself. News about Kyle reached me indirectly. The alternative program, less football, more assignments. His accounts growing quiet. Someone said his parents had finished in court and divided the house without fuss. I saw a distant photo. A boy in a low-pulled cap walking out of the courthouse, eyes swollen. Any urge to gloat left in me didn't move. At 17, sometimes understanding someone else's pain doesn't mean you have to go back near them. I turned off my phone and in my head stuck another strip of tape along the edge of the USB in the safe, a metaphor, but I need to remind myself, what's quiet? Let it stay quiet. At the art school, I submitted a recording for audio engineering. The piece Khakis, a melody that kept returning like a good habit. The teacher asked why that title. I said, "Because khakis are how my dad keeps time." The class laughed. The laughter was light, like a sticky note. You slap on the edge of your life's page, don't forget the small thing. My brother quit ball entirely. He crouched on the floor next to Dad learning to change chords without making the strings buzz. Some days Dad took the silver pick from his neck and clipped it to the guitar strap for him. The kids smiled, and that smile made the damp wood-smelling garage feel a few meters wider. I sat on the doorstep and realized boring doesn't mean silent. It's a different kind of background music, steady, low, unshowy. One Saturday afternoon, we went to the regional college fair. A sea of people info booths jammed together the smell of freshly printed flyers. I was reading a composition brochure when I saw a familiar figure at the far end of the gym cap, pulled low hands in pockets. Kyle. Our eyes met for exactly half a second. The no contact order drew an invisible circle around us. I gave the smallest nod, the nod you give someone who once knew you too well. He nodded too. He didn't turn toward me, didn't lift his phone, didn't perform. We turned away, each toward our own booth. Some endings don't need a soundtrack. That night, I dreamed of Dad on an empty stage, hands empty of a guitar. He only raised his hand to count off 1, 2, 3, 4. No sound rose, and I was still calm. I told Dad the dream while he was making coffee. He smiled. A rest is also a note. I thought about it and agreed. College acceptances came like a downpour after drought. One with a partial scholarship, one with a great dorm, one promising studios, open late. I chose a school a few hours' drive away, far enough to learn to fend for myself, close enough for the minivan to make the trip. Mom printed a shopping list. Dad downloaded campus parking maps. My brother asked which capo I wanted to take from the cheap guitar he's learning on. I scrunched my forehead. Just bring your heart. The old school's year-end ceremony arrived with a seating map that looked like an evacuation guide. I looked at the arrows and suddenly found it funny. I sent a picture to Dad with looks like a disaster movie. He replied, "As long as we can still find each other in the parking lot." The joke made all the arrows less sharp. When it was time for end-of-term performances at the art school, I signed up to play khakis live for the class. I invited my parents. Dad sat in the last row wearing a baseball cap like any ordinary dad. When I played the first note, he tilted his head just a little, the old habit of someone who used to be on stage and chose to leave. Mom sat beside him softly, singing a harmony I hadn't written. Afterward, a boy came over and asked, "Did your dad used to play?" The way he listens. He sounds like a musician. I said, "He used to do a very loud job. Now he's good at being quiet." The boy nodded the nod of someone who doesn't yet understand, but believes. Some nights I still bolt awake at 3 a.m., heart pounding from the old reflex, waiting for some explosive notification. I go to the mirror, look at the fuel fire sheet taped on the edge, and fill in one box, fear of being forgotten. Then I remind myself, no one's truly forgotten if there are still people who remember how to knock on each other's doors on the right beat. On the final day to submit college essays, I sat with Dad in the minivan outside the post office. He turned off the radio and said, "If you ever feel yourself wanting to beat someone again, text me. I'll put on the old playlist and we'll take a lap." I said, "Okay, the way you tuck a spare key under the doormat. Not for daily use, but knowing it's there makes your chest lighter." One late afternoon, while cleaning my desk drawer, my hand touched the USB. I opened the safe, took it out, and looked at it the way you look at a stone you brought back from an old climb. Everything's in there. Evidence, confessions, the hot mic moment, even what hurts me. I took it down to the garage. Dad was wiping the guitar. I said, "I think it's time to put this somewhere else." He nodded. We opened a little tin that holds nails, screws, odds and ends. I set the USB inside among things used to fix rather than to break. I closed the lid and labeled it with a marker for repairs. Dad looked at me and smiled. Makes sense. For the first time, I didn't see the USB as a weapon. It was documentation, and I was no longer the prosecutor. That evening, I sent a short email to the new interviewer. "I'm going to talk about a piece I wrote and about what I didn't post. I want to pursue things that require a lot of rests." I hit send, closed the laptop, and climbed into bed. Outside, the wind pushed the smell of wet leaves into the room. I thought about what had happened, not like a movie that needs rewinding, but like a recording that should keep the real breaths. The next morning, Dad pulled the minivan up to the yellow curb and handed me the familiar tumbler. I took it, opened the door, and finally said the words that had been stuck in my throat. "I'm sorry I was ashamed of you that day." Dad looked surprised for half a second and chuckled. I didn't take it to heart. I was busy, playing slow chords. I laughed too. Some apologies arrive late and still make it so long as you say them to the right person in the right place, then know how to be quiet. On the last day of school, I walked past the old field, empty bleachers. I sat on the third row and set my hand on a strip of flaking paint. Suddenly it was clear we'd used intimacy as a weapon because we were too afraid of being seen through. But then somehow, we both learned one thing. Some wounds only close in silence. Not the silence of running away, but the silence of steady breathing so you can keep living. When I stood up, I realized I wasn't waiting for someone to call my name so I could leave the field. I stepped down on my own, opened the gate myself, and walked toward the beige minivan with its blinker on. Inside, Dad tapped his fingers on the wheel to the beat of an old song. I climbed in, buckled up, and said, "Hit the playlist, Dad." He turned on the music. The road ahead had no fireworks, no victory sign, just steady white lines and rests in the right places. And that was enough. Chapter 8: The Returned Journal and the Lesson of the Rest. On college interview day, Dad pulled the minivan up to the yellow curb like every morning. He handed me the tumbler and gave no instructions except one line. "Just tell what you didn't post." I nodded and walked into a small conference room that smelled of old air conditioning. My interviewer was an alumna with silver hair, thin glasses, and a smile that didn't try to be warm. She asked about achievements. I told her about a piece called Khakis and a sheet taped beside my mirror labeled Fuel, Fire. She asked why I hadn't posted the hot mic clip from the pep rally. I said, because it would burn down bridges people will need later, and because silence is sometimes the only way not to become the person who hurt you. She neither nodded nor shook her head, just wrote a short line in her notebook. When we finished, she stood to shake my hand and said, some stories are only good when told to the right person. I walked out to find Dad leaning against the minivan lid off his coffee listening to people in cars. He didn't ask how'd it go. He just turned on the old playlist and drove one slow lap around campus like we were circling a lake. My hands stopped shaking. That afternoon, there was a brown envelope on our doorstep. No sender. Inside was my journal, the elastic blown out the cover's corner, torn in the same old place. A small paper the size of a bus ticket was tucked in the middle with two hurried words. Returning this. No, sorry. No explanation. I sat on the stoop and flipped to the page where I'd once written pathetic about Dad on a bad day. I penciled a thin line in the margin, a bad day, the truth. Then I tucked in a photo of Dad's hands picking chords in the garage. The notebook suddenly weighed exactly what it should no more. That night, I took the journal down to the garage. Dad was changing strings for my brother. I slid the notebook into the what happened stack. I didn't tell Dad who sent it. He didn't ask. We'd learned to respect the blanks that don't need filling. The school year drifted toward its end, like a song without a climax. When the yearbook came out, the dedications page was split right down the gossip half, Team Emma half team, Kyle, with a white strip between them as wide as a road. At the bottom margin, someone on the editorial board printed a tiny line, left blank, because sometimes silence is the message. I closed the book, my throat warm instead of tight. The music teacher at my old school emailed me a short note, complaint, baseless. I'm back next week. Don't let anyone use your music to make noise again. I replied with a single line, understood, period. Jess sent a voice note reading her scholarship essay. Her voice still shook in the parts about safe spaces. I adjusted a few rests and added a 2-bar guitar bed, with longer than usual silences. She texted back, feels like I can breathe. I grinned at my screen. One day I had to swing by the old school to return library books. On the steps, I ran into Kyle's mother. She held a file bag and wore the face of someone who'd memorized how to walk straight after a storm. We paused for half a second. The no contact line sat between us. She gave a small nod. I nodded back. Neither of us owed the other any words. Sometimes a nod keeps two people from falling back into the same hole. The adults were learning too. The coach Kyle's dad filed the school's new conflict of interest paperwork. At the parent meeting, he said one dry sentence. We don't use children as leverage. Mom said the whole room went quiet. The kind of quiet that admits. At the art school, I rehearsed for the final performance. The live version of Khakis needed a bridge. I thought for days and found nothing. One evening, Dad and my brother carried chairs out to the porch. Their guitars overlapped, one old voice, one new, without crowding each other. The bridge appeared between them like a borrowed sentence that decided to stay. I recorded it and sent it to my teacher. She wrote back one line, you've learned to leave space for others. Sometimes the old shakes still visited. I opened the safe and looked at the USB resting in the tin of screws, labeled for repairs. Some days, I only laid a hand on the lid and counted to 4 the way Dad does before coming in. The urge to crack it open faded a little each time. Eventually, I forgot which shelf the tin was on. That was the first time I felt I'd truly left the war. On a rainy afternoon, letters from colleges arrived. The first said congratulations. The second said partial scholarship. The third said studios open till 2 a.m. I taped all 3 to the wall. My brother ran in and hugged me, blurting, "You're really going far. Teach me this riff first." Dad stood in the doorway with a screwdriver in hand, eyes bright, in a very calm way. That night, an email came from the counseling office under the mediation terms. If any items needed to be returned via intermediary, here was the address. People work the way they patch roads, no drama, just pouring asphalt into potholes. I replied with thanks. A week later, the counselor set another brown envelope on the table. Inside was a cheap plastic pick, the kind I'd given Kyle for his birthday, and a tiny note. I used it in the wrong place. I folded the paper and dropped it in the for repairs box. Not out of sentiment, just because that's where it belonged. The old school's commencement happened with that evacuation map seating. I wasn't there, but someone sent me a photo. The caption read, "Still graduating, still wearing a gown, still a student." I saved it in a folder named Things That Happen Without Me Being There. On my performance day, I wore a simple dress and stepped onto our small stage. I gave one line of introduction. "This piece is for the people who chose ordinary." Then I played khakis. In the bridge, I could hear Dad counting in my head, 1, 2, 3, 4. When the last note fell, there wasn't a roar. Just a few soft whistles, a gentle tapping of desks, and a handful of eyes shining. I bowed and felt exactly as light as the weight of my guitar. Back home, Dad opened the garage and set the guitar on its stand. Mom handed me a folded quarter sheet, a dorm shopping list. I asked, "What's missing?" She said, "A family photo. You two pick." Dad pulled one from the drawer, taken on the porch, slanting sunlight, my brother holding the guitar, Mom smiling with teeth, my eyes shut against the breeze and the beige minivan soft in the background. He passed it to me. "This one's loud enough." I said, "Yes." That night, I opened the journal and wrote a new line. "Rests longer than applause." I set down the pen and closed the book. Outside, the rain had just stopped. The streetlight cast a thin band of yellow on the sidewalk, as fine as a guitar string. I know the story isn't exactly over. It's only changed key. For the first time, I'm looking forward to the next part, not out of suspense, but for the peace. And like any good habit, peace has to be practiced daily by opening the door, climbing into the minivan, turning on the old playlist, and counting 1, 2, 3, 4. Chapter 9, The Day of Leaving Home, and the List That Shouldn't Exist. The last week before I left my room looked like a little corner shop, cardboard boxes, packing tape, a dorm checklist Mom printed that was as thick as a prescription. On the desk, the small safe was shut. Inside were the For Repairs USB and the journal that had just come back with a photo tucked in of Dad's hands picking chords in the garage. I left them at home. I wanted to travel light. In the evening, Dad sat on the porch steps, taking the strings off my brother's guitar, threading new ones through the posts, turning the pegs to pitch. I leaned against a pillar, counting the beat out of habit. 1, 2, 3, 4. The house didn't talk about right and wrong anymore. It talked about what's for dinner, what time we wake up tomorrow, who's doing the dishes. Normalcy came back like an old friend waving. "Let me stay, yeah?" The next morning, I cleaned out an old drawer and pulled out an ancient iPad. I plugged it in for fun. It powered up, asked for the passcode, and my fingers remembered. After a moment, the data clouds rained down old photos, old notes, even things I thought I'd deleted. In notes, there was a file called Track that someone had once shared with me back when we were dating. I opened it and my palms went cold. It wasn't a music track list. It was a list: targets, military, police, church families. The serious on the outside, cracked on the inside story is easy to tell. Get in the habit of asking early about their parents, jobs, household routines. Below were a few stray bullet points, bits of other people's lives stamped good format for drama. I set the iPad down and pressed my forehead to the edge of the desk. A clean, cold anger passed through me. Not anger at being picked as a target, but at the idea that someone thinks a family is a genre you can set presets on. I stood up, did the deep breathing my therapist taught me, then took screenshots, sent them to no one, and dragged them straight into the What Happened folder. I added a pencil line to the journal's margin. Some people live by story. I live by tomorrow. That night, Jess video called. Her mom passed through the frame, smiled, and nodded. Jess talked about her scholarship interview, about the background track we'd sent. They said it sounded like breathing. I said yeah, then told her I'd just opened an old note that shouldn't exist. Jess went quiet, eyes wet, then said, "I'm sorry, back then I saw a targets folder on his phone." I didn't dare believe it. I stayed quiet. I said, "I've stayed quiet too, in places I should have spoken." It's okay saying it to each other now still counts. We looked at each other through the screen and understood that some things can't be fixed, but putting them in the right place is its own kind of fixing. Departure day, sky bright, no clouds. Dad loaded boxes into the minivan, careful, as if he were rolling drums onto a stage. Mom buckled my brother's seatbelt and glanced at the checklist one more time. I held the familiar tumbler and put one earbud in. Dad started the car, the old playlist came on, the guitar opened The Morning Like a Door. At a highway rest stop, I went to grab water. When I came back, I saw a sedan parked 2 spaces over. A boy in a baseball cap thinner, now hugging a paper sack, eyes on the concrete. Across the way, a very familiar woman his mother was paying inside the convenience store. The no contact order lay between us, like an invisible stripe of paint. I stood still for one beat. He looked up and met my eyes. No whispering, no hand sneaking for a phone, no theater. Just a small nod. Then we both turned away and got into our cars. Dad looked at me in the rearview mirror. I said I saw someone I used to know. He nodded and didn't ask more. Some things once quiet enough need no narration. Campus was as crowded as a street market smelling of new books. Dad carried boxes. Mom made the bed, my brother awkwardly tightened the shelf bolts. I taped the therapist's fuel fire sheet to the inside of the closet door. The family photo went on the desk, the one on the porch with the minivan blurred in the back. I pinned a small slip of paper to the corkboard. Begin with arrest. Mom sat on the edge of the bed and exhaled. The room gets sun. Dad tested the window latch, heard the tidy click, and smiled like he'd heard the right key. That evening, there was a spontaneous jam in the dorm courtyard. Someone was playing an old riff from Dad's band. I sat on the steps with a cup of tea and didn't say my dad wrote this or my dad used to play this. I just listened. For the first time, I felt I didn't need to defend a truth with a declaration. The truth knows how to stand on its own. Before my parents left, we walked the lake. Dad was counting time in his head. I could tell, by his shoulders, even rhythm. Mom tucked my arm into hers and said, "When you're tired, call home. Your dad will put on the playlist." I nodded the way you nod at a map with lots of green roots. That night, a strange message popped up on my phone. Good luck. No name, no avatar. The sentence was clean, with no trace of mockery. I looked at it for a moment and locked my phone. I didn't reply. Not out of pride. Because I've chosen not to restart a story for the sake of one well-wish. The next day, Dad texted a photo of the silver pick back around his neck, catching the morning sun in the rearview mirror. Caption, "I'm still counting." I smiled and sent back a shot of the new desk notebook pen, family photo, the fuel, fire sheet, and a blank corner just big enough for a guitar. My brother texted right after, with a short riff he'd just learned. The notes still buzzed, but they were headed the right way. My first class was narrative and digital ethics. The professor opened with, "The neater the story, the easier it sells, and the more dangerous it is." He told everyone to write about a time we almost used a story to hurt someone. I wrote about the USB, the pep rally, how a clip can burn every bridge. At the end, I added, I've learned to keep what could kill, like keeping a kitchen knife in its sheath so I can use it to cook. The next week, an email from my old school, completed. The no contact order expires on. I read the date and felt my heartbeat stay the same. No thrill of freedom, no fear of collision, just normal. Maybe that's the sign of healing. One weekend afternoon, I passed another dorm and overheard someone telling a breakup story with very polished delivery. The friend next to me clicked their tongue. He tells it so well. I didn't stay to hear the end. I just reminded myself telling it well and living well are two different roads. I choose the second, slower one. That night, I opened my journal and wrote, "Move-in day, begin living like someone who doesn't need an audience." I slipped a campus bus ticket between the pages, the ink smell still fresh. Outside, students in the courtyard were singing a song no one knew the verses to, but everyone knew the chorus. I closed the journal, turned off the light, lay down and counted. Like always, 1, 2, 3, 4. The next morning, I got up early and walked to the department studio. The glass door opened to the smell of fresh acoustic foam and new cables. I booted up, set the metronome to 72 BPM, slow enough to hear my own breathing. I recorded a short piece and named it Bridge. In the file notes, I wrote, "Use when you need to cross." I sent the track to Jess with one line, "Use it to breathe whenever you want." On the way back, I passed the notice board. There was a flyer for a talk on music and family. The speaker was someone from a famous 90s band now teaching here. I snapped a photo and sent it to Dad. "Did they invite you?" He replied with a laughing emoji. "I'm busy. Gonna hear you tell stories." I laughed to myself in the hallway and felt suddenly light. Maybe that's how stories really end, not with a curtain drop, but with an ordinary day beginning. An ordinary, if kept in time, can move you longer than any applause. Chapter 10. The final note of an ordinary song. Orientation week drifted by on things not worth a status update, a bad student ID photo, a creased campus map, a list of study rooms open till 2 a.m. I put the family photo on my desk, taped the fuel, fire sheet back to the inside of the closet door, and reminded myself of Dad's line. Just tell what you didn't post. On the first Monday morning, I stepped out into the dorm, quad-breathed in wet grass, and felt like I'd opened a new file named Ordinary. In narrative and digital ethics, the professor asked each of us to talk about a moment we didn't hit post. I spoke about the USB sitting in the screw tin labeled "for repairs," about the hot mic at the pep rally, about a bridge you could burn with a single click. The professor didn't clap. He only asked, "And why do you still keep it?" I said. "To remember, I chose not to harm, even when I could have." He nodded like marking off a beat. By day, I studied. By night, I worked in the department studio, coiling cables, propping mics, swapping batteries, standing behind glass while other people cut their tracks. Some nights, it was my turn. I set the metronome to 72 BPM and played a new version of Khakis. The bridge was the bit I'd borrowed from Dad's and my brother's guitars on the porch that night. Two melody lines not crowding each other, just walking side by side, close enough to become a road. When I stopped, the room stayed quiet for 5 seconds. Then a few light taps on the table, a few smiles. I bowed. Some moments get heard without needing to be loud. A flat email from my old school announced the date the no contact order would expire. I looked at that timestamp, the way you look at an oil change reminder worth remembering, not worth drama. I didn't screenshot it for anyone didn't count down. I only added one line to my journal, "No particular feeling." Maybe that's a good sign. Jess called with news the scholarship came through, and her essay used the bridge segment. They said it sounds like breathing. I congratulated her and asked when she'd visit. When everything settles. We've learned to speak in short sentences and let the rests handle the rest. Over the weekend, my parents visited. The beige minivan parked under the maples. Dad carried in a box of coffee candies. Mom brought new sheets. We sat on the steps sharing brown paper-wrapped sandwiches. No one mentioned 3 platinum albums. No one mentioned the journal incident. Mom asked, "Is breakfast at the dining hall?" "Okay," Dad asked. "Does the guitar stool in the studio vibrate?" I said, "It's fine." And a little, small stories like highway marker lights, enough to see the road, not blinding. Before they left, Dad stood in the room and looked around like he was tuning the acoustics. He said, "If there's a day you feel like winning again, text me. I'll put on the playlist and we'll take a lap on Google Maps." I laughed. Spare keys like that make your chest a little lighter. One afternoon, I passed the student union and heard someone picking an old riff from Dad's band. I stopped for a beat and didn't say my dad used to play that. I silently hummed along. Truth doesn't need a badge if you stop wearing it to impress. A message arrived from my old school's counseling office. Content removals under the agreement have been completed. One short line, the feed a little quieter. I replied, received, like closing a file and clipping it at the back of a cabinet with no red tag. One night, a reminder popped out of my What Happened folder, the screenshot of the target list on the iPad from moving day. I didn't open it. I renamed the folder to remember not to retaliate, then dragged it deep into an external drive. I don't want those things too close to where I write music. Midweek, I played an open mic at the cafe near campus. Nobody knew me, and nobody needed to. I introduced the song, "This is for people who choose ordinary." I played khakis. At the end, a girl near the counter called, "Your dad must be really good at listening to music." I smiled. "He's better at listening to silence." She nodded. We split a cookie and talked about how silence isn't running away. It's a skill. My brother sent a self-recorded video, a riff that didn't quite round off yet, but his eyes were bright in a gentle way. The coach made a new rule for the team. He added no dragging anyone's home life into the group chat anymore. I read that line over and over. Adults can learn too, just a little slower. Near dusk, the dorm mailroom called me down for a package. Inside was a small frame with the porch photo of my brother hugging the guitar, Mom smiling me, squinting in the sun, the beige minivan blurred in the back. On the back of the frame, Dad had written in pen, "Boring is the bravest choice." I set it on the desk next to fuel, fire. 2 sheets saying the same thing in 2 languages, music and silence. That night, I dreamed of a stage with no lights and no audience. Dad stood in the wings and raised his hand to count 1, 2, 3, 4. I walked out without a guitar. I just stood there and breathed in time. When I woke, I understood that peace isn't the absence of conflict. It's keeping time in the middle of conflicts that will surely return someday. Over the weekend, I wrote a short essay for class, "When Intimacy Becomes a Weapon." I told how we used what we knew about each other to hurt each other, how we learned to put the weapons down not because we forgave at once, but because we understood that whoever wins still loses. I ended with an image, a USB and a tin of screws. From weapon to documentation, from evidence to reminder. No one clapped, but the professor wrote in the margin, "You're learning how to live, not just how to tell." In the afternoon, rain arrived out of nowhere. I ran across the quad water, shattering on the bricks, dampness rising. I opened my door, turned on the old playlist, some live cut from a 90s band, and sat down at my desk. I opened my notebook and wrote, "Continue ordinary tomorrow." I stuck a small note on the edge of the mirror, "Begin with a rest." Late that night, Dad texted a photo in the rear view, the silver pick reflecting the streetlight, the minivan's wheel, and 2 of his fingers tapping time. Caption, "I'm still counting. Keep going." I looked at the screen and felt my throat warm like I'd just sipped tea. I turned out the lights. The student city outside was just loud enough. Inside, everything fell into place. The frame, the sheet of paper, the guitar in the corner, Jess's email, confirming the scholarship, my brother's text about changing chords without buzzing. I pulled up the blanket and counted quietly in my head. 1, 2, 3, 4. No fireworks, no victory sign, just the steady white lane lines of the road. I chose the old playlist, a beige minivan, somewhere moving slowly through the rain, a middle-aged man in khakis, choosing silence every day, and a girl learning to keep time so she doesn't lose it. That's enough to end this part. The next one, if it comes, will start the same way, a rest, then one step. Chapter 11. Break a letter and a bridge. Wide enough? I came home on a clear morning, a little cold, tapping the window like a metronome. The beige minivan was already at the yellow curb. Dad stepped out and gave me a just right hug, not long, not awkward. He handed me the familiar tumbler and said exactly one thing. Let's go home first. Everything else can wait. All the way back, the old playlist played very softly. I leaned my head against the seat and realized an ordinary house doesn't demand I tell a better version of the story. Home was the same, the smell of laundry detergent, the dishwasher's hum, a garage messy enough to look lived in. My brother banged on my door to show he'd nailed the bridge I sent. The notes still buzzed, but his grin was radiant, the kind of smile that doesn't need an audience. At dinner, Mom set a chicken soup pot in the middle of the table. No one brought up the old stuff. Dad asked about digital ethics, and I told him about the assignment to write about what you didn't post. My brother asked me to fix the descending picking at the end of the bridge. Big stories turned into small questions. Add a few milliseconds of rest, change the fingering at the third fret or the fifth. The next morning, the mail carrier left a thick envelope on the porch, stamped with my old school's logo. Inside was a packet marked Procedures Completed, and another smaller envelope sealed by the counseling office. On it, forwarded by intermediary per agreement. I opened it. A sheet of paper folded in half, slanted handwriting. I was wrong about many things. I'm in therapy now. Thank you for not canceling me when you could have. I won't contact you again. No name, no flourish. Just that. I took the paper down to the garage. The tin box labeled for repairs sat on the shelf next to the screws and an old ledger. I dropped the sheet between the USB and the cheap plastic plectrum. Dad looked at me, but didn't ask from whom. I didn't explain. Some things only need to be put in the right place for our part to be done. In the afternoon, Jess texted Freeze. The fast food place near our old school had the same corner table as always. We sat facing each other, both looking out at the strip of wet asphalt. Jess told me about the final scholarship interview, about how they asked what a safe space is, and she answered a place where you can breathe all 4 beats before you speak. I laughed. Sounds like music. Jess squeezed my hand for a second. I'm sorry I was quiet when I shouldn't have been. I nodded. I'm sorry I spoke when I should have been quiet. The fries disappeared fast. We hugged like teammates back in the locker room. No slogans needed. That evening, the parent meeting at the old school projected the new rules, no dragging home life, into group chats. Conflicts of interest must be disclosed. Mom came home and said the room went silent when the coach, Kyle's dad, read one short line. We don't use children as leverage. I don't know how long it took him to get to that sentence, but I know it arrived right on time. On the weekend, the town held an open mic at the little corner cafe, the one I'd passed every year without stopping. Dad asked, "Want to try?" I hesitated for half a beat, then nodded. We brought the cheap guitar, not the legendary black case. When it was my turn, I said into the mic, "This one's for people who chose ordinary." I played khakis. Dad sat below with his head slightly tilted, counting time with his fingers on his knee. In the bridge, I could hear my brother practicing at home, one small run hidden between 2 rows of trees. When the final note fell, a few light taps on tabletops sounded. No one asked, "Who's your dad?" No one asked for a photo. A short-haired girl came by and said, "Sounds like going home." I answered exactly what I meant. On the way back, the cold wind slipped down my collar. Dad asked, "Need a longer rest at the end?" I smiled, half a beat more. He nodded. Yeah, funny how the biggest story of my life was shrinking down to small adjustments exactly where it belongs. Music, not the internet. The next day, I reopened my journal. The old, pathetic page lay quiet between two others. I drew a fine line in the margin, apology made. Below it, I stuck a photo of us on the porch. My brother with the guitar, Mom, smiling dad, counting time with his fingers, the minivan blurred in the back. No caption. The photo knew how to speak. In the afternoon, my brother and I tweaked notes. He asked, "Do you think someday people will start talking about us again?" I said, "People always talk. Our job is to live so that if they get it wrong, we can still sleep." He nodded, face serious like a grown-up. I let him try the silver pick around his neck for a beat, then took it back and hung it on the nail beside the 4 repairs box. The pick glinted under the warm light, like a comma hanging at the end of a sentence. Pause, breathe, then go on. That night, I tidied my laptop. The What Happened folder took up a corner of the screen, heavy as a paperweight. I copied it to an external drive, put it in the safe, locked it, then deleted the copy on my machine. Not because I'm afraid of someone else finding it, because I don't want to open it myself on some late night and set fire to a bridge I've already crossed. With a cleaner desktop, I made a new folder called What's Being Lived. I dragged in the khakis recording the bridge segment, the family photo, the fuel, fire sheet, and next semester's schedule. That was enough. A few days before Christmas, Grandma called everyone over for apple pie. She repeated the tiny treaty, everyone has the right to be sad, but no one posts someone else's sadness. We okayed it like kids in a flag ceremony. On the way out, she tucked a card into my hand. For the girl who learned to count before speaking. No cash, inside just one line. Boring is brave. I laughed right there at the door, the sound like a perfectly tuned open string. On the last night at home, I stepped onto the porch. The chill stung my cheeks. I laid my hand on the door frame and counted softly 1, 2, 3, 4. The garage was dark, but I could still make out the metal box on the shelf. I thought of the I was wrong letter resting there, the cheap plastic pick, the USB that used to feel hot, like coal, and now cool in the hand, like an eraser. Those things didn't vanish. They only changed jobs from burning to fixing, from accusing to reminding. In the morning, the minivan took me to the station. The old playlist ran once, then went quiet. Dad killed the engine and turned to me. "Text arrived when you get there." That's enough. I hugged him, coffee and sun-warm fabric on his shirt. My brother tapped my palm the way bandmates do before going on stage. Mom straightened my scarf and gave one last simple line. "If it's cold, go inside." I pulled my suitcase into the terminal. My phone buzzed an email from the student magazine. The piece, "When not posting is an ethical choice," was accepted. They asked if I wanted my real name on it. I looked up at the ceiling beams running like a music staff and replied, "Use my real name. But please no photo. Leave the blank space." Below, I added a pull quote, "Rests last longer than applause." The bus pulled out. I leaned my head on the window and watched the city fade like a soft fade out. Dad's text came through a rear view shot, the silver pick glinting the steering wheel, 2 fingers tapping time. Caption, "I'm still counting." I tapped my thigh in time and sent back, "I'm still listening." Between 2 cities, between 2 chapters of a life, there's a bridge just wide enough, built from 4 beat breaths, from a beige minivan, from short letters, from the things you chose not to do. I'm walking across that bridge unrushed. On the far side are school, the studio people who don't know my name and don't need to. And at the end of the bridge, I know there's one more thing I have to do before the story really lowers its curtain. But that's tomorrow's business. Chapter 12, The Final Recording and How to Put It Down. I said at the end of the previous chapter that there was one more thing I had to do before lowering the curtain. Not to meet anyone, not to post anything. To reset the purpose of something I'd kept in the safe for too long. Saturday afternoon, the department studio was as quiet as a kitchen after dinner. I brought the tin box labeled for repairs, with the USB, a cheap plastic plectrum, and the I was wrong slip inside. I powered up, turned on the mic, and recorded three sounds only I would understand: the click of the safe's lock, the clack of the tin lid closing, and the tiniest tick when I tapped the pick's tip against the guitar neck. Three sounds, small as punctuation marks. I dragged them into the DAW, set them at 72 BPM, the heartbeat I've practiced for months, and laid khakis over the top. The new bridge wasn't a showy melody, but punctuation put in the right places. When it was done, I named the track For Repairs Bridge Home. I sent the recording to Jess. She replied, "Sounds like a door being locked while the lights are still on inside." I laughed to myself. Exactly. That week, the cafe in town hosted a free music night. Chalkboard. Everyone gets 10 minutes. Dad asked, "Want to play the new one?" I nodded. He loaded the cheap guitar into the minivan, opened the door for me, didn't bring up 3 platinum albums. He just said, "Remember to count." At the cafe, the smell of coffee and damp wood made me feel safe. I signed up and scribbled 3 words: Emma, original. When my turn came, I said one short line into the mic. "This song is for the people who chose ordinary and the things they've kept quiet." Then I played For Repairs, Bridge, Home. In the middle, the click, clack, and tick sounded soft as someone knocking, shutting a door, and tapping a rhythm on a kitchen table. I saw Dad, in the last row, tilt his head in his old habit. Mom sat beside him, a hand on her knee, breathing evenly. My brother filmed on an old phone, but I knew it was just for a keepsake, not to post. When the final note thinned out, the room didn't erupt. There were light taps on tables, a few shy whistles, and one line from the short-haired girl who'd heard me last time. "Sounds like someone got home and locked the door from the inside." I bowed. Dad stood without fuss, set a hand on my shoulder as I stepped down. "You counted right." On the way back, the little street slid by under warm yellow light. Dad asked, and the USB, I opened the console and took out a keychain with a cheap plastic charm. I slipped the USB onto it, snapped it closed, and said, "I've repurposed it. Now it's a tool like a screwdriver. Use it when you need to fix something, not to stab." Dad smiled, fingers tapping the wheel, 1, 2, 3, 4. The next day I swung by the old school to return a long overdue library book. The gate was as quiet as a lockdown-era street photo. On the steps, a boy in a baseball cap came the other way. We saw each other for exactly 1 beat. No obligation to speak. No need to pretend we didn't see. I nodded. He nodded. We both kept going. Halfway down the stairs, it hit me some stories end when both people know they've ended. In the afternoon, Grandma called everyone over for apple pie. Afterward, she pulled a small tin from a drawer inside Grandpa's old wristwatch. "It doesn't keep time anymore," she said, "but wearing it reminds you to count." She handed it to Dad. He grinned, clipped his silver pick to the watch strap, and said, "Let it click, so I remember." The little click was enough to make the table laugh. I thought our house really is full of things that remind us of time now. That night, I opened my laptop to write the piece for the student magazine, "When Not Posting is an Ethical Choice." I told the story without names, places, or identifying details. I wrote about the For Repairs box, the rules taped to the mirror, how a recording can carry the soft clack of a lid instead of the bang of fireworks. At the end, I set one italic line: "If a clip can burn a bridge, a rest can build one." I sent the draft, shut the laptop, and made cocoa. Outside, the wind batted the wind chimes like someone gently tapping a 4 count. Monday morning, the accepted email arrived sooner than I'd expected. The editor asked if I wanted an illustration. I replied, "No. Please leave blank space." I realized I was smiling in a new way, not because it would be published, but because I'd preserved the blank. After school, my brother ran home and showed me a new riff. Less buzz. When do you think we'll play together at the cafe? He asked. When you can keep time without watching your hands. He nodded and started over, dead serious. Dad leaned in the doorway, the old watch clicking softly under the kitchen light. Toward evening, I tidied the safe. What happened sat on the external drive. I left it. What's being lived was open on my desk. I took the My Rules page I'd written before and added one last line in pencil: do not turn grief into content. I taped it back inside the closet door, right next to the family photo, with the minivan blurred in the back. The door closed with a small click, like a familiar note. Before bed, my phone buzzed. Jess sent a short file, her voice reading the end of her essay, Bridge Home, underneath. She said I'm learning to breathe all 4 beats before I speak. I replied, me too. No emoji, no need. On the day I headed back to school, Dad drove me to the station in the minivan. The old playlist played very softly. We didn't talk much. When we arrived, he turned off the engine and looked at me like a teammate heading into the second half. Remember, if a day comes when you want to win against someone again, text me. I'll turn on the metronome. I nodded. My brother gave a clean, one-and-done palm tap. Mom tucked my scarf the way she always does. Last reminder, simple as ever, if it's cold, go inside. On the coach bus, I opened my journal and wrote one last line for this chapter. I've learned how to put things down the USB, the reflex, to clap back the need to be right at any cost. I'm keeping what's needed for the long road, the 4 count, the old playlist, the family photo, and the right to leave blank space. I tucked a fresh bus ticket between the pages, the ink still alive. As the bus turned down the hill out of town, my phone lit up. Dad had sent a rear-view photo of the silver pick and the old watch face glinting in the sun, his 2 fingers tapping 4 beats on the wheel. Caption only, 3 words, I'm still counting. I set the phone down and tapped my thigh 1, 2, 3, 4. No fireworks. No shout of happy ending. Just a normal recording playing all the way through, leaving a final rest longer than applause. I sat still and let that rest spread out to exactly the size of a beige minivan driving somewhere between 2 cities, and I knew that from that rest, a new song would begin, not with a bang, but with a door opening, a hand settling on the wheel, and 4 steady breaths. If one post can burn every bridge, then one rest can build them back. I didn't cancel anyone. I just put the USB in the right box, kept a 4-beat count, and moved on. What would you do with proof in your hand that could finish someone off hit post or put it down? Tell me in the comments. If you enjoy true Reddit stories packed with Reddit drama that still land on Kinder choices, follow the channel and ring the bell so you don't miss the next episode. See you in the next story.